Welcome back, Focus Learners. Let's jump right into today's explainer, because we are traveling way back in time to explore the high-stakes, prehistoric world our ancestors navigated long before they ever mastered fire. I want you to imagine a time before matches, before stoves, and before that comforting glow of a hearth. How did humanity actually survive in a world where warmth was completely unknown and the night brought untamed invisible dangers? And perhaps more importantly, how did surviving those exact dangers lay the foundation for the very first human villages? It's an incredibly fascinating story, and it goes way beyond just assuming our ancestors were physically tougher than we are today. So let's get into it.
Think about what we do today when the sun goes down. We flip a switch for instant light, we lock our doors to feel perfectly safe, we crank up the heater, and if we're hungry, we just head to a supermarket full of ready-to-eat food. But if you look at the prehistoric side of things, the contrast is absolutely jarring. For early humans, sunset meant total, pitch-black darkness. It meant invisible predators roaming right outside. It meant relentless, freezing exposure, and relying entirely on raw foraging. Every single meal had to be found, every shelter had to be discovered, and every single night was a very real existential threat.
Section 1. The baseline problem. A world without warmth.
Now, we've got to make a really important distinction right off the bat here. We often talk about fire as if it was this sudden invention, but fire and controlled fire are absolutely not the same thing. Natural fire existed in the environment way before humans ever figured out how to use it. I mean, our ancestors would have seen dry grass catching fire from lightning strikes, or flames shooting out from volcanic activity. They'd have witnessed massive, terrifying wildfires sweeping through forests. So they certainly knew about fire, but early on, it was a wildly unpredictable force that they were terrified of and ran from. It definitely wasn't a comforting tool to stay warm.
Section 2. The food challenge. Extracting energy. So if you literally can't cook your food, how on earth do you fuel your body? Without a stove, or even just a pot of boiling water, how do you eat? Our ancestors had to rely heavily on things that could be eaten raw, right? Fruits, leaves, seeds, insects, eggs. But getting dense, useful nutrition from stuff like tough roots, tubers, and raw animal tissues wasn't just a matter of chewing harder. Eating a piece of raw meat back then was nothing like having a modern tenderized steak. It was incredibly tough and really difficult for the body to digest. They desperately needed a way to process it.
And that brings us to a crucial turning point. They developed technology. It might just look like a jagged rock to us today, but sharp stone flakes were a total game changer. Early humans used these simple, brilliant tools to slice tough meat, separate tissue from bone, and break down stubborn plants. And even more brilliantly, they used heavier stones as hammers to smash open bones and get to the highly nutritious marrow hidden inside. This meant humans didn't necessarily need a roaring fire to make their food useful. They had stone tools, a piece of technology they were constantly refining to extract the calories they needed to survive.
Section 3. Surviving the dark night.
While getting enough food was a huge daytime challenge, a much more terrifying reality kicked in the second the sun dipped below the horizon. Imagine standing out in a vast, open landscape at night. No streetlights, no flashlights. You can't see what's rustling in the tall grass, and you have no idea if that snapping twig is a harmless animal or a massive predator tracking your scent. You can't just lock a sturdy door and curl up in bed. So where exactly did our ancestors sleep without freezing to death or becoming a midnight snack?
Well, it completely depended on their ability to read the landscape. They had to seek out natural shelters. Rock overhangs, deep caves, and incredibly thick vegetation became temporary, life-saving homes. These natural spots gave them a buffer against harsh weather and at least some barrier against predators. And to fight off the freezing cold without the heat of a campfire, they'd use natural insulating materials, curl up in specific postures to conserve body heat, and huddle closely together to share warmth. Because every environment was completely different, there was no one-size-fits-all strategy. They just had to be endlessly adaptable.
Which brings us to perhaps the most vital survival mechanism they had, summed up perfectly right here. A single human alone in the dark is incredibly vulnerable, but a group? That changes the math entirely. Living in cooperative groups dramatically shifted the odds of survival, and it's here that we really see the earliest seeds of what would eventually become the first human villages. Being in a group meant more eyes scanning the dark for threats, more hands foraging during the day, and a collective, organized effort to protect the vulnerable children of the community.
And the perks of the group went way beyond just physical safety. Information itself became a literal survival technology. Think about it. If one person figures out which specific berry won't make you sick, they share that with the whole group. If someone tracks down a reliable hidden water source, the entire community maps it out in their minds. If a certain valley is known for dangerous predators, they collectively know to steer clear. Survival wasn't just about who had the biggest muscles, it relied entirely on collective intelligence. This incredible web of shared knowledge was the social glue that eventually held early village communities together.
Section 4. The gradual spark of change.
It is a super common misconception that one prehistoric genius just woke up, invented fire, and changed the world overnight. It definitely didn't happen in one dramatic eureka moment. It was a slow, incredibly deliberate, multi-generational process. First, humans figured out how to opportunistically use naturally occurring fires. Then, they took a huge leap by learning how to safely capture and carry burning wood or embers from those wildfires. Next, they learned how to feed and maintain that fire so it wouldn't just burn out. And finally, after a massive span of time, they reached the ultimate achievement, the ability to deliberately produce fire on demand. Every single one of these steps took immense observation and, frankly, a lot of courage.
So when did these massive shifts actually happen? Scientists still debate the exact timeline, but the archaeological record gives us some amazing clues. Down in Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, researchers found traces of burned plant materials and combustion that date back roughly 1 million years. And at a site called Gesher Ben Yaakov over in Israel, there's evidence from about 780,000 years ago showing signs of both controlled fire and food processing. These sites are incredible because they prove that, slowly but surely, fire was being domesticated and permanently added to the human toolkit.
Once humans could reliably control fire, the advantages were, quite frankly, staggering. It completely rewrote the rules of survival. Suddenly, you had a reliable source of warmth on freezing nights. You had a glowing circle of light that literally pushed back the terrifying darkness and kept predators at bay. Cooking unlocked massive amounts of calories, making tough meats and fibrous tubers way easier to chew and digest. But maybe most importantly, controlled fire anchored them. It created the campsite, a safe, designated gathering space. People sat together, ate together, and shared stories around the flames. This right here was the true genesis of the very first human villages.
Section 5. The real human superpower.
It's crucial to remember that human survival was never riding on just one single invention. Our evolutionary success was a massive puzzle of countless different behaviors working together over millions of years. Before fire ever became a controllable tool, our ancestors were already solving impossibly complex problems. They were securing food, surviving brutal cold, navigating completely uncharted landscapes, and keeping their kids alive without any modern medicine, all using extremely basic tools. They faced down starvation, apex predators, and brutal weather, and they just kept surviving, generation after generation.
Which brings us to the core takeaway of today's explainer. The absolute greatest survival technology wasn't the flame itself. It was our ancestors' inherent incredible capacity to learn, to adapt, to cooperate, and to pass that hard-won knowledge down through the generations. When they needed to process food, they shaped stones. When they needed to stay warm, they adapted to the geography. When they were threatened, they banded together. Fire just became another powerful tool integrated into a system that was already incredibly resilient. Their real superpower was community. It was the collective ability to use these traits to build those first permanent campsites, which ultimately evolved into the very first thriving human villages.
And that leaves us with a lingering thought to wrap up on today. Right now, technology is mostly something we just download onto a screen. Comfort is something we command with a thermostat. In our modern world of instant light, endless supermarkets, and total convenience, it is so easy to forget how grueling ordinary existence used to be. So, when we look back at this incredible history of resilience and collective problem-solving, I have to ask, have we lost touch with that powerful, innate ability to adapt and cooperate that kept humanity alive in the dark? It's definitely something to think about the next time you casually flip a light switch. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep learning.